on today's episode of GS Chronicles, we're going to be taking my 2003 dirty S55 AMG and doing a coilover conversion from the hydraulic ABC suspension. ABC stands for active body control. It's a very failure-prone system, and today we're going to go and take care of that and eliminate it altogether because the pump for it just went out. All right, first thing we're going to do, we're going to start off at the left rear. We're going to go finish jacking up the car, and then we're going to take the wheel off. All right, so after we have our jack stand in, the next thing we're going to do is go right over there. That fitting there is for the ABC line, so we're going to be loosening it, and that will depressurize the system. Unfortunately, it seems like I don't have an 11 millimeter flare nut. I have a 10 and a 12. So what will happen is I'm just going to be using a regular wrench. Usually you shouldn't want to do this, but since we're removing it from the car, I don't really care if I screw up the nut. And then this is going to go and depressurize and squirt down into my little tray I have there. Now, it looks like in my case there really isn't much pressure, which isn't a surprise because the pump had failed, so it couldn't really create pressure. So it didn't really have to bleed very much. Next up, we're going to take off the suspension height sensor link. This is actually where you put a lowering link. We're using 16 millimeter, and you just kind of pop it off. And that's it. After removing the strut bolt, now we're going to loosen the outer lower control arm bolt. This is also a 21 millimeter. On that outer lower control arm, there's a special bolt on the opposite side of that 21 millimeter nut. However, once you break it free, you don't really need to hold the socket that much. And it's just pretty much just keep it from rotating. And so you can improvise if you don't have that special socket. Now for the top of the strut, I went and I put in a light so it's easier to look through the glass and see what's going on. First thing we do is we will pull up this cover, and then I'm going to be using a 13 millimeter, and it has this swivel fitting. Removing the sensor from the strut is a huge pain, so I came to the front so at least I can demo what I'm doing at the rear. So what you're trying to do is clamp on this, come on, and then pull up gently, and they'll disconnect. All right, in my case, because I didn't loosen the bolt inboards, I'm gonna have to push the arm down, and then that'll allow me to get the strut out. Now that the strut's lowered, we're gonna take off the quick disconnect. We'll see if mine's seized or if it comes off relatively easy. Oh, yeah, pop right off. Cool. All right, after jacking up the car higher, we're gonna work on getting the strut out. I'm trying to avoid taking off the other bolt to drop the lower control arm, but I might have to.
A few moments later.
We're gonna go and loosen that other lower control arm bolt. I thought we could get away with it, but it looks like it's just not enough room. All right, there we go. Got it loose. Now we can kind of just drop that down like so. Finally, be able to slide the strut out. Before continuing any other work, you're gonna want to put in the plug. At this point, I mocked up the new coilover and I just held it in with one of my extensions, and then I'm gonna gradually jack this up and then guide it into the hole. You'll see here as I start to jack the coilover up, it'll start to go into the hole. With the coilover pushed up into place, now we can put the 3 nuts back on. If you leave the dampening adjustment knob in, the cover won't be able to sit down all the way because it sticks up, but you can go and still, once you adjust all the dampening, you can pull that out and they'll still go and snap back down. All right, we have the strut bolted up to the top, and then we have our extension just kind of holding things in place. Now it's time to put in the lower control arm bolt and then the strut bolt back in. And then for the suspension height linkage, just a matter of pushing it back on. In this case, I'm just squeezing it with some vice grips. And there it is. Then once the strut's all nice and in, we're just gonna go and kind of tuck this back there. Supposedly this does rattle around and make noise. We'll see. Maybe we'll end up just doing a zip tie eventually, just around the strut. But we'll see how that goes. And then obviously we need to go and lock down the collar based on whatever height we chose. And I'm just gonna be doing hand tight for now so that I can keep adjusting the height to my preference. Now we're gonna move to the front. First thing we're gonna have to do is get the car jacked up and get the wheel off. Next up, we're gonna take off this bracket that holds the line. It is an 8mm. And by taking it off, you're just gonna be able to get a little bit more movement out of things while removing the strut. And my preference here is actually wiggle it free from the rubber grommet and just remove the entire metal bracket. Now the bracket's off, and then the rubber piece too. Be sure to have your drip pan ready when we take off the quick disconnect. This one is harder to get to than the rear, but it still shouldn't be too bad. All right, I'm gonna go and loosen up this bracket here just to give us a little bit more wiggle room for taking off the quick disconnect. All right, to take off the bracket, this looks to be a 10mm. And hopefully this will give us a little bit more room to wiggle the line for the quick disconnect. I'm just failing with this quick disconnect. It's like, it's just getting caught up on disconnecting. Ah, there it is. It looks like if you can get a 19 in here, kind of like right below, you can help pull up on it. It's just, you don't have very much to grab onto in the front. And then once you can pull on it, try to pull up straight, it should come out. And then just like the rear, we're gonna put our plug in, and we'll do this before taking out the strut. That way we don't drop a bunch of junk into the line. And then I'll put in a link of where I bought these plugs. Now that the line is plugged, we can go and put our line bracket back on. First thing we'll do before taking off the strut is we're gonna go and hit this right here with some PV Blaster or WD-40 to loosen up these bolts, because mine are extremely stuck. The reason for the WD-40 or PV Blaster is that when I was initially trying to take it off, I actually had bent this, and then when I tried to put it into a socket, I actually cracked the socket. So go and let that soak for a while. It'll help take it off. All right, I'm now gonna attempt to break the front bolt loose. This is a hex bit. I'm not sure of the size because mine aren't marked. All right, that went pretty easy after soaking a bunch of WD-40 into it. All right, we got one side out, and now we'll take off the other. Part of the reason why this is so hard to take off was it had blue thread locker on it. All right, we're popping the hood to get to the top strut bolts. I guess I need some new struts. I feel like everything in this car hates me. All right, let me go get a 2x4. So what you're trying to do is clamp on this. Come on, and then pull up gently, and they'll disconnect. We can now take off the 3 nuts at the top of the strut. And these are 13mm and should come off pretty easily. Now that all of our fasteners are off, it's time to drop the strut. In this case, I'm letting the suspension and pushing it down so I can lift the coil off, and then it should just drop right out. Just kind of wiggle it up. There you go. When dropping in the new coilovers, you'll notice that the top hat actually isn't flat. So pretty much the lowest point, that one will go towards the engine. And that lines up with right here. So we're going to start by feeding this back through, making sure we get that orientation correct. And the first thing we will do is, once it's kind of up into place, is we will actually put it on the ball joint. Make sure it's on that stem. There we go. That kind of holds in place. And then that means you can come up here, like so. Start to put the bolts on. Sorry, nuts. And now we can go and put our set screws back in to the strap. I'm doing this hand tight on each side, and then I will gradually tighten each side equally until it's all cinched down. Once the bottom is tight with the set screws, I'll then go and put a little bit of load into the suspension, and then that will raise these up all the way to be tightened. Now with everything tightened down and out of the way, we can go and put our wheel back on. All right, the next step, starting on the driver's side fuse box. Take off the cover, and you'll see this 20 amp fuse here. I already pre-loosened it, so we take that one off. We come over to the passenger side. We take off that cover, and then over here, you'll see there's a 5 amp fuse. We'll remove that, and then I'm also attaching the diagram to show both of these locations. And the whole purpose of removing the fuses is that when you start the car, the red error that we usually get here turns into a white soft error, and then that can just be cleared every time you turn on the car by hitting the reset. This just ends up being a lot cheaper solution than buying the Strutmaster module. This concludes our conversion from ABC to coilover suspension. I will do a part 2 at some point, which will be the removal of all the excess lines because they no longer serve a function. And then there's a second part, which is you can get rid of the tandem pump found in the ABC cars to just convert over to a regular S-Class power steering pump, which is about $100 instead of $1,000. I'm not sure when that'll happen, but it will be at some point in the future. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video and it's helpful for you doing your own conversion. Thanks.